This happened to me about 3 years ago during Christmas break. I was 22 at the time, living in an apartment complex in suburban Ohio. The building was pretty quiet, mostly young professionals and a few older couples. I'd been there for about 8 months and never had any issues. My parents lived 4 hours away, and I'd driven down to spend Christmas Eve with them. The plan was to stay overnight and drive back Christmas Day afternoon so I could work the day after. It was a simple trip, nothing unusual about it. I got back to my apartment around 6 p.m. on Christmas Day. It was already dark, and the parking lot was mostly empty. A lot of people had gone out of town for the holidays. I remember noticing that because it made the place feel kind of eerie. I parked, grabbed my bag from the back seat, and headed up to my second-floor unit. When I unlocked my door, I noticed it was colder inside than it should have been. Not freezing, just cooler than I'd left it. I figured maybe the heat had kicked off while I was gone. I didn't think much of it. I set my bag down and went to the kitchen to get some water. That's when I saw it. One of the chairs at my small dining table had been pulled out. Not a lot, just enough that it was clearly moved from where I always kept it pushed in. I'm pretty particular about things like that. I always push my chairs in before I leave. I stood there staring at it for a minute. Then I convinced myself I must have forgotten. Maybe I'd been in a rush on Christmas Eve morning and didn't notice. It was possible. I pushed the chair back in and went to my bedroom. My bed was made. Everything looked normal. I changed clothes and turned on the TV, trying to relax. But something kept nagging at me. The apartment just felt different somehow. Around 9 p.m., I went to the bathroom. When I came back out, the dining chair was pulled out again. The same one. Pulled out the exact same amount. My stomach dropped. I stood in the hallway, just staring at it. I knew I'd pushed it in an hour earlier. I was absolutely certain. I checked every room. My closets, behind my shower curtain, under my bed. Nothing. All my windows were locked. The front door was locked. I was alone. I called my neighbor across the hall, an older guy named Dennis. He didn't answer. I tried the apartment manager's emergency line, but it just rang. Everyone was gone for Christmas. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with the TV on, and every light in the apartment turned on. I kept watching that chair. It didn't move again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. That someone might still be there somehow. The next morning, I went down to the apartment office as soon as it opened. The manager checked the security footage from Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. She didn't see anyone enter my building who didn't belong there. But then she checked my specific unit number in their maintenance logs. There was an entry from Christmas Day, around 2 p.m. A maintenance worker had entered my apartment to check a pipe issue that was reported in the unit below mine. She said they had a master key and were authorized to enter units for emergencies. But here's the thing. She couldn't tell me which worker it was. The log just said maintenance check with no name. And when she called the maintenance supervisor, he said no one had been scheduled to work on Christmas Day. No one was even supposed to be in the building. I moved out 2 months later. I never found out who was in my apartment that day, or why they moved my chair. The manager said it must have been an error in the system, but she couldn't explain the log entry. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd come home earlier. I used to work overnight shifts at a 24-hour drugstore in a strip mall in New Jersey. This was back in December 2019. The store was open for the holidays, and they needed someone to cover Christmas night into the morning of the 26th. I volunteered because the holiday pay was good, and I didn't have family in the area anyway. The shift started at 10 p.m. It was just me and one other person, a cashier named Melissa. She was up front, and I was mostly restocking shelves and handling inventory in the back. The store was completely dead. Maybe 5 customers came in the entire night, all before midnight. Around 1 a.m., Melissa came to the back and said she was taking her break in the employee room. She'd be gone for 15 minutes. That left me alone on the floor. I was in the seasonal aisle putting away leftover Christmas items when I heard the front door chime. Someone had walked in. I called out, "I'll be right with you," and finished what I was doing. When I walked toward the front, I didn't see anyone. I checked the aisles. No one. I went to the register area and looked out at the parking lot through the front windows. There were 2 cars out there, mine and Melissa's. No one else. I went back to restocking. Maybe 10 minutes later, the door chimed again. Same thing. I walked to the front. No one there. No cars had left the parking lot. When Melissa came back from her break, I mentioned it to her. She laughed it off and said the door sensor was probably glitchy because of the cold. It was around 20 degrees outside that night. At 3 a.m., I went to the back storage room to grab more boxes. The room had motion sensor lights, so when I walked in, they turned on automatically. I was in there for maybe 2 minutes when the lights suddenly shut off. That only happened when no motion was detected for 5 minutes. I froze. I didn't move. The lights should have stayed on, unless something had reset the timer, unless someone else had walked in before me and stood completely still until I arrived. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I scanned the room. It wasn't big, just rows of metal shelves and boxes. I didn't see anyone, but I felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I left and went straight to Melissa. I told her I thought someone was in the store. She checked the security monitor behind the counter. It showed 4 camera feeds: front entrance, register, seasonal aisle, and back hallway. Nothing unusual. Then she rewound the footage to 1 a.m. We watched the front door camera. At exactly 1:04 a.m., the door opened. By itself. No one walked in. It just swung open and then closed. Same thing at 1:17 a.m. Melissa went pale. She said the doors were weighted and wouldn't open unless someone pushed them or stepped on a sensor mat. We watched the back hallway camera next. At 2:58 a.m., the storage room door opened. I walked in at 2:59, but at 2:55, the door cracked open slightly, just an inch, and then it closed again before I got there. We called the police. They came around 4 a.m. and searched the entire building. They didn't find anyone. One of the officers said it was probably a malfunction. That old stores had issues like this all the time. But before they left, the younger cop pulled me aside. He said 2 weeks earlier, a few blocks away, they'd arrested a man who'd been hiding inside a department store after closing. He'd been living in the ceiling crawl space for almost a week, watching people. The officer said they never found out if he'd done it at other stores. I didn't finish my shift that night. Melissa and I locked up early and waited in the parking lot until the morning crew arrived. I quit 3 days later. I still don't know if someone was in that store with us. I know those doors didn't open on their own. In December 2020, I drove out to visit my brother in rural Pennsylvania for Christmas. He lived in an old farmhouse about 40 minutes outside of Harrisburg, way out in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbor was at least 2 miles down the road. I got there on December 23rd around dinner time. My brother and his wife were great hosts, and everything was fine that first night. We stayed up late talking, had a few drinks, the usual holiday stuff. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I woke up around 8 a.m. I went downstairs to make coffee and noticed the back door was slightly open. Not wide open, just unlatched. Cold air was coming in. I closed it and locked it. I figured maybe my brother's dog had nudged it open during the night. The dog was a big German shepherd, pretty strong. At breakfast, I mentioned it to my brother. He looked confused. He said the dog slept in their bedroom upstairs and hadn't been down during the night. He also said he specifically remembered locking that door before bed because it had been windy. We kind of laughed it off. Old house, old locks. Maybe it hadn't latched properly. That afternoon, we drove into town to pick up some last-minute groceries. We were gone for maybe 2 hours. When we got back, the back door was open again. This time it was fully open, swinging in the wind. My brother didn't laugh it off this time. He checked the lock. It wasn't broken. It had been turned from the inside. We searched the whole house. Closets, basement, attic. Nothing. His wife checked if anything was missing. Everything was where it should be. That night, none of us really said it, but we were all on edge. My brother kept getting up to check the doors and windows. Around 11 p.m., we heard the dog barking. Not normal barking. Kind of aggressive barking he did when he sensed something wrong. My brother grabbed a flashlight and went to the back door. The dog was standing at the door, hackles raised, staring out the window into the backyard. My brother shined the light outside. There were footprints in the snow, fresh ones, leading from the woods to the back door, and then back toward the woods. We called the police. They came out around midnight. They followed the prints into the trees, but lost the trail about 100 yards in. One of the officers said it looked like someone had been standing outside the door for a while. The snow was packed down in one spot like they'd been waiting. They checked the property and didn't find anyone. They said they'd increased patrols in the area and told us to call if anything else happened. Nothing else happened that night, or Christmas Day. We didn't talk about it much, but none of us were comfortable. I left on December 26th. A few days later, my brother called me. He said he'd been going through some old mail and found a letter that had been delivered a few weeks earlier, before I arrived. It was addressed to current resident, with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. Printed on it was a photo of their house, taken from the backyard. In the photo, you could see into the kitchen window. My brother and his wife were visible inside, eating dinner. The photo was dated December 10th. They moved out in February. My brother never told me if they found out who'd been watching them. I don't think they wanted to know.